Hi, everybody. Dana Litwin here again, and welcome back to Priceless Advice with Leaders of Volunteers. And I am delighted today to feature Jamese Robinson, MA, CVA, lots of fantastic alphabet soup. And she's about to be in grad school to add more alphabet soup and credentials to her name. Welcome, Jamese. So glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, so glad to be here. Excited to talk.
Yay. So I wanted to get you on the show for May to help promote. This is going to be your first time presenting at Points of Light. But before we get into that, if whatever you want to share of your background, and we'll have this in the video description and links to relevant sites as well. But tell us a little bit about how you got into volunteer engagement and leading volunteers and running programs.
Yeah, honestly, I will say it feels like it kind of came to me, so to speak. I have a background in mental health. Both of my degrees are in psychology, so I've always just been really fascinated by other people's behaviors. And I think the way that kind of translated was getting a bachelor's degree or getting a master's degree without licensure. It's very hard to find jobs that offer you clinical work experience. But I kind of found my place in crisis intervention work. So oftentimes those are coming out of nonprofits. And so as I was doing this crisis intervention work, I was about 8 years into just straight up crisis intervention. I had an opportunity after working with volunteers in the crisis intervention world to kind of pivot and start supporting more on the back end. And that's kind of how I got here today. I was in my role for less than 10 months. This opportunity presented itself. I knew someone that was kind of doing a really similar job. And I was really excited about the idea of like being able to help the people who were helping our contacts. And so from there, I kind of pivoted. I've kind of followed the flow of things as the organization needs have changed and as our program has really changed and adapted. And so I've kind of found my place now, really focusing within the volunteer engagement field on community building and things like that.
I imagine it's quite helpful to have so much education and knowledge about psychology when relationship building and trust and communication and understanding where other people are coming from emotionally, mentally, and in many cases physically, with barriers to volunteering. How has your education and background and professional study improved or informed the work leading volunteers or designing policies and programs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, everything that I do is very person-centered. And psychology really is about understanding other people. At the heart of it, it really is around understanding and navigating different experiences that other people have, different perspectives, and really prioritizing how you understand that. And so having that background, I think, has been really beneficial for me because I have that drive to understand what makes people tick. I have that drive to understand what motivates someone to do this work. Um, Being able to support them also, I think, really just specifically with the work that I do and that crisis intervention aspect is that I understand the emotional turmoil that comes with it, the tertiary trauma that comes with the work that our volunteers are putting themselves into. And so a lot of that understanding allows me to support folks and better navigate when they're struggling to manage, conversations that are really difficult on the lines and things like that.
And I'm imagining that most of your coordinators and people in your department, do they have a similar or very different educational background going into crisis care?
That's a really good question. I think that there is a really solid mix of folks. I'm really seeing, I would say I have folks on my team who have like a master's in social work. I have a team member who's currently going back to school right now, specifically for nonprofit administration. So I think we have a really solid mix, and having that background in mental health really just in this particular organization, it seems to really make a difference when I'm able to offer that type of insight.
I imagine that's very valuable insights to offer, and also some sort of kind of speaking the same professional jargon with some of your coworkers and teammates around being trauma informed and the work that even if you're not working for an agency with a crisis line as its main mission, there's really, I think, a lot of benefit to understanding trauma informed responses with almost any kind of community service or volunteering at this point, because everyone in societies around the world is going through collective trauma at different levels, at different times, and usually overlapping quite a bit. And I know that that also kind of helps spark the idea for your Points of Light session. Do you want to share how you put that together and got the idea to apply and you got accepted? So people are going to see
Yeah.
this. We don't want to give too many spoilers of the session, but just a little trailer preview
Yeah.
so they can hopefully register for the for Points of Light if they're going to be there, and make sure to pop into your session there.
Yeah, really excited to first of all be there. I'm very excited to have this workshop. I think a lot of what I do is really a part of what's driven me to really want to speak up on this matter. One of the things I'm obviously most passionate about is representation and seeing myself in the work that I do. And I think it's very hard, even, when folks talk about volunteering, I think it's very hard for us to acknowledge the level of privilege that comes with that, of even just being able to give your time or even access those things. As someone who's been volunteering since I was in high school, I'm very privileged in that sense, right? But it never occurred to me back then how fortunate I was to be able to give the way that I was. So really, this workshop that I'm presenting at Points of Light is going to be around how we, as a volunteer engagement field, can just be more equity driven, right? So acknowledging that there are systemic barriers in place and how we can just be ultimately more inclusive in the way that we are building out our volunteer programs, really. So I'm really focusing on that. I think it's going to be something that's really more of like a three-part thing where we're going to talk about those systemic barriers. We're going to acknowledge it. We're going to hear, hopefully, from folks that are there, what they've seen in practice. We're also going to talk about what it looks like in practice to just drive that equity, to be more intentional and be more insightful in how we're building out our volunteer bases, whether that's practice, once they're already volunteers, or even in things like recruitment, because that's something I've really gotten to navigate most recently as well. And then I really want to set the folks that are attending up to be able to take what they've learned and take it back to work with them, right? Because one of the biggest things, and I'm sure we'll get to talk about this, is like creating things that are really applicable to the field. It's really easy to do research. It's really easy to write papers. It's really easy to talk about these things. But if you can't take what you're talking about and apply it to something, then it's just not really practical. And I don't want to create work that doesn't go anywhere, essentially.
And that ties into some other projects that we're overlapping in, but I want you to shout out and give a plug to what's your session title and what date and time is it occurring at Points of Light, which this year is happening in Houston, since the Points of Light conference moves cities every year. So it's in Houston in June.
I
Ooh,
know.
hoping for the AC working in the convention center and the hotels. And
Oh goodness, I really hope that all goes well. I'm really excited to be going to Houston though. I'm really excited to be in the city. So my workshop title is Equity-Driven Volunteer Engagement, Understanding and Unpacking Systemic Barriers for an Inclusive Impact. And so this will be a 60-minute workshop and it's going to be on Tuesday. So I believe that's June 11th and it's at 4 o'clock Central Standard Time.
yay, just in time to go out to dinner afterwards with
Yeah.
cohorts. And there's going to be a lot of other great activities, a live social. Usually when I'm at Points of Light, I put together a karaoke group, and I can't attend this year, so I'm sure someone will pick up the slack, and
Yes.
there'll be a lot of other fun things and great sessions. So this ties in your workshop, your work in general, overlaps. We're on different teams under a research project called ADEVI 2, which
Mhm.
stands for, it's a follow-up of creating toolkits. It's assessing diversity and equity and volunteer involvement, and it's spearheaded by Professor Mark Hager and a number of grad students. I was just on a call with all of them this morning. And the first year of ADEVI, a year and a half ago, was just surveying our sector, surveying leaders of volunteers and nonprofits across the board. And I'll link to where you can find that research and those stats. And
Yeah.
now you and I are directly involved in, speaking of needing practical tools to apply these big abstract ideas. We're each on different teams. There are kind of 6 different teams or areas of focus for creating toolkits that will in September or by the fall of this year, those toolkits that are in development now will all be available on Volunteer Match as part of the Learning Center that's headed there by Jennifer Bennett, another great friend and colleague, and talk about how your equity work, human-centered, trauma-informed, how that's folding into the topic and focus area of your team in this building these ADEVI toolkits. And again, disclaimer, this is in process right now in May, and it's going to be in process over the summer, and then the finished tool. So we're not really previewing something that's solid right now, but these tools are being adapted or created right as we're recording this, and they'll be available in the fall. But talk about your work in that team and what that means to you professionally and personally.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like you said, all of my background, all of my experiences, they really do tie into this work, which is why I was really excited to have an opportunity to be involved. But in particular, my team is really looking at how we're managing volunteer programs, really with an emphasis on, diversity and equity and inclusion. The part that I'm really deep diving into and that I'm owning in this process is around coaching. And so for me, coaching specifically for volunteer performance, I really have been diving into what that looks like. So in the matter of, what coaching looks like, I think it was really important for me to understand how this could be something that's applied across the board. Working in crisis intervention, I feel like it's easy for me to say this is what it looks like here. I really wanted to help to create a project or a product really that anyone can use. And whether that's someone who's working in volunteer engagement at, an animal shelter or someone who's working in volunteer engagement at a hospital, I thought it was really important to recognize that these toolkits should be applicable across the board. So as far as coaching, I think it's pretty broad in that sense. It's really looking at things like skill development, whatever that skill looks like, whether it's short-term, long-term, and other aspects of that.
And that's really the goal of ADEVI 2, or this whole research, the research and the answers, which then inform, okay, these tools are the ones that should be created or at least researched and seen if do some of these tools exist. And one of the frameworks that all of our teams are working on, and my team that I'm leading, is planning and advocacy for strategic volunteer involvement. And that team or that area of interest really overlaps with everybody else's. Some are mentorship, some are training, some are leadership, and it all is very connected, and we're all communicating with each other. And there might be tools that apply for, hey, use this with episodic volunteers, use this with regular occurring volunteers. So we're all trying to look through that really generalized lens of how can this be used by as wide of and diverse of an audience and practitioners as possible and be useful. And they'll be, updated. Probably, I'm guessing if we get feedback right away, maybe there's some changes or some updates to clarify things as these tools roll out. So they're not fixed forever, but it's a great starting point to just be like, everything's in this toolbox. Beep, 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 beep. I can download what I need and use what I need. But the frameworks that, I think most teams are working with around the tools, and they might be rubrics of text, they might be graphs, they might be tables, but the general framework that we're talking about with the ADEVI in these tools is the current practice, a ideal practice, what's the best and current way to do this, because language and terms and framings around these ideas are always evolving and changing. And then the sustainability piece, which is how does this, beyond a one-pager graphic easy tool or a template or a needs assessment or whatever these items look like, what does it look like for that to be sustainable? Because I know I've run into, as a consultant, I'm doing webinars in May about JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, with a couple of other panelists. And we can talk about this topic and do webinars and workshops, but what it really takes to affect long-term change and cultural shift within an organization is, intentional, dedicated, mindful, strategic planning with these at this level, which my team has just a tiny little lift to just create those, just a little thing to weave into your whole strategic pillar. It'll be fine. It's fine. But how useful would tools like these have been to you or will be to you? But if you think a few years ago in your career, what would it have been like to do this work with something like that tool just ready to grab?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even not even a few years ago, as recent as last year, at the organization that I work with, something that was built from scratch was how we manage performance flags. Because the reality is that, especially being in crisis work, it's really important that we're putting the contact safety at the forefront. So, for years in this role, we weren't navigating performance issues on a large scale. It was very much a case by case basis. Something happens and someone happens to flag it, right? We'll address it from there. But as we scaled, as we grew very quickly, we had to find a way to be able to manage performance in a way that didn't require a huge capacity of work. So, our my team is amazing. They've built out this way of managing that. It's absolutely pivoted over time, but having something in place, something to really guide instead of having to build something out like that out from scratch, I mean, it would have absolutely saved a lot of time. And I think it would have probably been a bit more intentional versus having to create something on the fly because there was a need for it immediately versus creating something proactively ahead of time.
And I completely agree with that. I'm going to yes and with the idea that we all know how wacky our schedules get as leaders of volunteers and creating programs. I did day jobs working for agencies for 20 something years, and even working for myself. I'm either a terrible boss because I work too much and I don't give myself a break, or I'm a foolish boss who gives myself too much time off. But there's always more work to do. There's always something to fill your plate, to fill up that bandwidth. And the point of this is like, this is easy. It's accessible in every sense of the word, and helping improve your accessibility is definitely a big part of the toolkit. And ideally, this ends up saving people time just with a tiny little bit of learning and front end, or putting things in place so that these ideas of, you can call it IDEA or JEDI or DEI, whatever acronym you use, doesn't matter as much as the work getting done and the work being done consistently and intentionally.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see what your group comes up with. A few toolkits. I think we're each coming up with maybe 3 to 5 ideas, and we'll see
Yeah.
how that evolves, or some might combine into each other if they overlap a lot over the summer. But I'm looking forward to, always trying to make everyone's lives easier in the sector,
Yeah.
because we're traumatized. It's hard enough. We're
I love
all
it.
we're all the walking wounded.
We're just trauma bonding, no
We're
biggie.
just trauma bonding with each other all the time, with, humor and uh, some great coping mechanisms, some not great
Yeah.
coping mechanisms.
We try. We do our best around here.
Harm reduction. If you make it through the day, you're doing great. You're doing great
Yes.
with yourself. If you were to give some advice with your kind of psychology degree, separate from your fantastic catchphrase, but in what you know and what you've learned in crisis intervention, how do you think that can apply to the work in general, or maybe how's that informing additionally what you're doing around coaching with these potential research tools?
I know when I say this, it's gonna sound so generic, but really empathy. I
Yeah,
mean,
true.
it feels like something that's so simple, but the reality is that some people do struggle to have empathy. But really, as I think about crisis intervention work, as I think about working with people in the volunteer engagement sector, if you don't have empathy, how can you possibly support someone? How can you possibly figure out what their motivations and their needs are and be available to offer support in that moment? It's very important, I think, for me when constantly whatever I'm doing, because I think that, particularly with my population, a lot of how they express themselves can be very angry. It can be very frustrated. Sometimes it feels very not nice. We can have conversations that are very hard. But I think as long as I put my empathy forward, I'm able to really think about, there are so many things that could be driving someone to respond or show up in that way that have absolutely nothing to do with me. And so I think when people, respond in a negative way to that, it's like, are you thinking about like, are you prioritizing yourself in that moment? Are you centering yourself in that moment? Because that's the worst thing you can do. If you start taking things personal, you've already lost the game there. So I think empathy for me is always going to be the driving force, regardless of where I am with volunteer engagement or, with my mental health side of things. Um, as long as I'm able to really put myself in someone's shoes and recognize there is a better way of navigating something and understanding someone's perspective, I think that that will always thrive for me.
Not centering yourself is good general advice and a lot of de-escalation communication,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, as well. And staying emotionally neutral and active listening. And again, speaking of tools in a toolbox, all these things that have been available for many, many years or decades. I think, again, back to the meme of the moment, the one that's constantly circulating of, I don't know how to explain to you that you're supposed to care about other people. That's
Mm-hmm.
sadly more and more relevant to every aspect of our daily lives in the United States and other countries in the world, that we're losing, or people are being both pushed to by algorithms and rage engagement and clicks, and also encouraged to be their worst selves. So they're kind
Mm-hmm.
of getting uh, the carte blanche to, no, be selfish, hyper individualism, only care about yourself, misery loves company, like however you want to define it. We're seeing more and more of that. Is that impacting your crisis line work? Like, has there been an increase with hostility and legislation against the LGBTQIA population, which is what you're mostly currently working with in your current position? Um, but how is that like, hey, all these websites and social media site owners are encouraging people to be terrible to each other because that gets them more clicks and more eyes on advertisements. How is that reflecting into your work?
Yeah, I will say, I mean, for me personally, I think it's been a lot of continuing to walk a line of I want to support everybody because that's just my natural stance on things, and recognizing that support for folks who are really struggling in these moments, especially with the way the world is right now, is it looks different for everybody. So like really being intuitive and just asking the question of like, what do you need? I want to say from a contact perspective, again, folks show up in crisis and that can look different, right? It doesn't necessarily look like someone who needs help. They might be frustrated. They're like cursing you out. They're just not being very nice. But I think that the people I work with, regardless of what the world is going through at any given moment, always do a really great job at centering the contacts that we work with. And so I don't feel that it's impacting the service that we provide. I do feel like it's taking a toll on us as individuals and how we show up to work. And I think it's been challenging and it's been really interesting having conversations with folks on, on different stances. But for me personally, I'm gonna show up for you regardless of where your head is at in that moment. And so I've been able to do that, and I think I've tried to encourage that across the board with my team as well. Really emphasizing that, everyone is experiencing things differently.
And that speaks to, how do you and your team and leaders of volunteers then detoxify from stress or trauma or compassion fatigue specifically? And I've done my own webinars and workshops because I've worked with populations and like animal welfare and conservation, where there's a lot of compassion fatigue, where it feels like you're up against an immovable object of a very messed up system and way of doing things in the world, that's counter
Yeah.
to empathy, that's counter to connection, that is constantly recreating new traumas for everybody to struggle with. How do you take care of yourself, or how do your teammates kind of take care of your own mental or physical well-being in those situations?
Yeah, and I think it's very much like you said, we're very much being conditioned right now to not take care of ourselves in the way and to defer to, just trauma and hurt and those really big feelings. I'll say my team is quite amazing in how we show up for each other. We and I'm someone who I have a lot of vacation time because I'm really bad at taking vacations. Like I'm horrible at it. And I took one recently, but even then it's like almost 5 years in, and that's probably the longest time I've ever been away. So I think we just do a really good job of being honest and transparent, and we can be our full selves with each other. Not to say that, I'm going to be like fully transparent with like the CEO of an organization, but within my own team, I can be very transparent. I can say this is where I'm at today. And or someone else can say this is where I'm at today. I'm really struggling. I have a coworker today who's like working and not feeling well. So I'm like, no. Yes, absolutely. Let's change meetings around. Like, what do you need? What can I cover for you? What so my team just does a really good job of showing up for each other. And I think that's something that's really sustained us. I think taking time when we need to. I have a manager who really encourages that and also leads by example, taking time when they need to. And so we feel really encouraged to do the same. And so I think we're just doing a really good job of taking care of each other. And it shows.
That's an important model to live in. And I'm glad that your immediate supervisor is doing that and you're doing that with your team, because it doesn't benefit anybody if we don't take the time off, if we don't take mental health days, if we don't take physical rest days. And that's
Yeah.
another accessibility thing of disabilities, whether they're invisible or
Mhm.
apparent, or that people make assumptions about ability or disability by how someone looks or how they're functioning. Again, I think especially in nonprofit, our sector is really prone, and I'm always trying to advocate for this, and hopefully these toolkits that we're creating with these teams around planning and advocacy help bake this in. That's my goal, is that we don't want to succumb to the typical nonprofit exploitation
Mm.
grind culture where, oh, you're on salary, which means we get an infinite access to you and your time and your schedule and your energy, and 60-hour work weeks are normal, or 80 or 100-hour work weeks at certain times of years are normal. And that's, I'm in San Francisco, and almost everyone I know is somehow involved in technology, Silicon Valley stuff.
Yeah.
And there's that grind culture that's specific to certain corporations or industries that isn't healthy. It's not a good balance
Mhm.
for anybody. And more and more, I'm hoping that executive directors, CEOs, general managers, boards realize that, squeezing the last drop of useful juice out of people is not sustainable. And it's particularly not sustainable in our current day and age, and ongoing pandemic impacts, both on mental and physical health, on labor shortages for volunteers and paid staff, on the impacts of long COVID disabling millions of people. And I know this has been like, ooh, what a fun, happy session of priceless advice. But no, we're getting there. We're getting there. There's just, we're gonna dismiss the rain clouds of mood here in a second. But my point is, with all that, is that with so much going on, for you to be able to stay in this kind of work, keep yourself upbeat, keep yourself going, incredibly commendable. I admire your work very much. And what are you hoping to get out of the next few years with your graduate study and with your work? Like, what does a career path look like for you in the next year or two or three or five?
Yeah. And so I mentioned representation earlier, and I think it's really important for me to highlight and uplift the fact that I've seen some really amazing people of color and some roles that are higher up and have more of a seat at the table, so to speak. So certainly not at the very top. It's like very not common to have a person of color who's like leading a major nonprofit like the one that I work at and is, in the C-suite. I haven't seen it at least. And so for me, I think it's a really exciting opportunity for me to have balance of still navigating the nonprofit space, learning all that I can, really getting a sense of the bigger picture instead of the smaller picture that we're often confined to because of our roles, and also really drawing this experience into my grad program. Um, I hope to be that representation one day. I hope to be at the top of a nonprofit organization, being a person of color, really driving initiatives of change and putting more people that look like me into seats of stakeholders. I think that for me, I've really been impacted by seeing in several roles people within my organizations over the years, both that are here and not here anymore, who have really just represented for me that, something like that was attainable. And so that's really driven my mindset to say, okay, we can do this work, we can get to this place, and we can be here and we can make a difference. And maybe it's not the difference that we want right now and it's not immediate, but change takes time. We know that. And so I'm really excited about pursuing my degree, gaining more experience, especially within mental health, and being able to pour that back into just a position of being able to make real change within a nonprofit organization, similar to what I'm doing now.
You're here to that, and I look forward to being able to call you Dr. Robinson in
Yes,
the
thank
next little
you.
while. More delicious alphabet soup and honorifics and credentials
Adding on.
just adding on, just stir it around. It's so good. What good soup? What good soup it
Yes,
is.
yes, I love it.
And is there anything else that you want to convey to folks who are watching on the show, or any other topics you want to cover?
I mean, I just want to say that, but being a mentee has truly actually been one of the most pivotal things in my life personally. I've never really understood the true value of having that mentee mentor relationship, having the opportunity to really network and connect with people who are in positions that you want to be in one day. I know people say it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I do see that there is value to knowing people who are where you want to be. You have an opportunity to, especially when you're coming from a background of being disadvantaged, you have an opportunity to know these things that you probably would take many, many, many years to learn on your own. You have an opportunity to get that somewhere. It's a little bit more fast tracked. And so there's so much value in making those connections with people who, again, are just like in the position that you want to be in. I'm so big on that now. I think it's really easy to let the world or society or the field that you're in tell you like you can't do these things. So it's very mental. But building these connections has been probably the best thing that's ever happened for my career. And it's given me a lot of confidence to go after what I want and do these really amazing things. And so if you don't have a mentor, you should get one. Just saying.
The Alive Mentor Program is really easy, fun to navigate. It's not, it can be as much or as little time as mentors, mentees want to put into it. I've been in the program most of the cycle since it started in 2018 when I was on the live board and president. And I think being a mentor and a mentee is also important. I like to sandwich those things every few years because there's always that learning opportunity. There's
Yeah.
always that opportunity for growth, whether someone's a really different age from you, a really different background from you. So even though I've done a lot of mentoring, and specifically with the LI program where we met, I love being a mentee as well, because there's a lot of things to learn. So if folks want information on that, I'll put that in the links below. And thank you so much, Jamese. An absolute pleasure to have you on Priceless Advice with Leaders of Volunteers. I'm super excited about your Points of Light session and everything that's coming up with you in your career.
Yay. I'm
Thanks
so
you.
excited.
Yay. And I'll put the information about your sessions also in the video description, and I'll talk about it when I repost this in different social media platforms, that hopefully folks in Houston can find their way to your session and enjoy themselves and learn a lot. And I've learned a lot and felt like I've grown a lot as a person working with you so much in these
Yay.
last several months, 6 months or longer.
I know.
And
It doesn't
and
feel
I
like it's 6 months. It flew by.
it just flew by like that. And I'm really excited for our work with the ADEVI 2 project and the toolkit that's coming out. And just so thank you so much again for being on Priceless Advice. Thank you, Jamese, for your Tuesday tips. And we hope that folks tune in and catch up with your work, because it's going to be amazing in the
Thank
next little while.
you. Glad to be here.